Hello, all, and welcome in to our webinar for today for data management strategies for winning proposals. The chat is activated, so please put in your name, where you're from, and say hello to us, as well as maybe answering the question, what is your biggest data problem today? Excited to be here with you. My name is Dhoreena Ventura. I am your host and moderator for today, and the Director of Product Marketing here at OpenAsset. And here with me is Brandy Wilkins Katter, Corporate Marketing Systems Manager at Spectrum Engineers. Welcome, Brandy.
Hi, Dhoreena. Thank you so much for having me here today. Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy. Just a little bit about myself. I have over 20 years of experience in marketing, and over 10 of those years have been in the AEC industry. I've worked for both small and large companies in a number of roles, pretty much anywhere from proposal writer responding to both technical and general requests to a technical writer, creating technical trainings for system maintenance, including support materials, and a data manager, which is the function I'm currently in, and I would create and maintain many different databases, including CRMs, DAMs, and other repositories. Throughout my career, you could say I've worn many hats, sometimes one role at a time, but in many cases, multiple roles at a time, as is very typical with marketing. Although I'm no longer actively working as a proposal writer, my time in that role gives me a very clear understanding of many of the plights associated with the role. I understand what it's like to need information and not be able to find it. Ultimately, this knowledge, this feeling, the kind of anxiety that you would get when you're on a deadline and not be able to find what you were looking for, this knowledge led to my passion for creating marketing systems that eliminate the inability to find consistent information easily. Throughout my time in the AEC industry, I've implemented and refined asset management systems for over 15 organizations, both on the AE side and the GC side. I have seen the effects of good, bad, and transitioning asset management strategy. And because I've been there, I'm very driven to enable my fellow marketers to discover ways to move past the reactive urgency of today into more proactive, creative, and strategic positions. I love watching my teams embrace more creative marketing strategies, especially as they no longer have to spend a vast amount of time searching for data. Although I've seen many creative and unique proposal responses, one of my favorites that came after a major data implementation was one that went out for a major retailer, which was completely digital, and it was presented in the context of aisles. So there was an aisle that the owner could click on for the project team, an aisle for related project experience, an aisle for company information, an aisle for schedule, etc. So I really loved seeing that, and I've seen so many creative proposals, but that was one of my favorites. Before I get into our discussion, I'm going to turn the time back to Dhoreena to discuss the state of AEC.
Amazing. Thank you, Brandy. Speaking of wearing many hats, now this slide is meant to be an eye chart speaking about the different areas that AEC marketers dabble in, with most of that time being around business development support. So we know and understand that AEC marketers do a lot day to day, but as you see here, data management is one of the key pillars of AEC marketing to have that successful business development support. And one of the reasons why we're here today, because when we extracted a lot of the data around challenges, data management was one of them. We conducted this research last year and we recently launched this. So if you don't have access to it yet, we're also going to include that link in our chat, but feel free to scan the QR code here. We have two proposals or two reports here, and we were able to get over 900 responses. Probably some of them from the people that are viewing this webinar today. So we ask questions like how much time is being spent on proposals, how long does it take you to create it, and how many of you submit your proposals the day of the deadline, which I tell you is actually pretty high. So if you're interested in the state of AEC and also a deep dive in proposals, scan the QR code and we'll also follow up with this research. So thank you for all the transparency in getting insights into the AEC world here. So from that research, we were able to extract the number one challenge is actually managing data, or top three when it comes to the most frustrating marketing activity that marketers have to work on. So 62% cite that it is one of the top three, as well as 38% still use manual file management via Excel, Word, or probably that individual folder that you have on your desktop that no one else has access to centralize assets. And when it comes to creating proposals, the number one challenge is gathering and editing that existing content. So only 35% have a searchable, taggable database today. So for the 65% of you that do, you are already 10 steps ahead. While this one, some of you may argue with me that it may even be higher, but 70% of the marketers struggle to obtain content from technical teams, which is the reason why we brought in Brandy today. She's helped AEC firms bring data to life in a form that is accessible for AEC marketers, to where we're not struggling to obtain that information all the time over and over again. Now, Brandy is going to teach y'all how to tame that data through an intro in all things data management and definitions of that and what it truly means, as well as real life examples on how to manage your data through real time and historical data management. With that, also best practices, not only best practices, but failures and successes that we can all learn from today. And we'll also make sure to leave time for Q&A and discussion. So if you have questions throughout Brandy's content, please feel free to put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A button in the Zoom. We're excited to have that portion and discuss with you all also. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brandy. Brandy, over to you.
Hey there, thank you so much. Today we'll discuss what is data management, why it matters, the cost of data handling, including some real life case studies from myself and other organizations, and then some practices that'll help you all tackle data management. Now, I know we probably have definitions for these things, or at least a general idea of what they mean, but I do want to discuss at a high level some of those definitions just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Now, as a note, when I say data, I mean all assets. So it would include data and digital assets such as project, personnel, and company information, as well as boilerplate text, photos, and videos. Our current marketing tech stack, just for transparency, so you know what we're using when I reference terms like DAM or CRM, project management software, etc. We're using OpenAsset for our DAM. We have Uninet for our CRM. We use Monday.com as a project management software. We have a website that is managed by WordPress. We use Scribe for a little AI-supported process development, and Old Trusty, Outlook. Although this is what we use in our marketing department, I will share practices that can be modified to other arrangements. One of the things I want to note before I move to the next slide is how we evaluate new programs. Now, there's a wealth of criteria that we use in our evaluation, but very specifically, two things that I like to look at are what each program specializes in. For example, we're not going to use WordPress as a CRM, and a CRM is not likely going to be our DAM because that's not the function. We also like to look at its integration capability. So how well does it play nicely with our other systems? This is important to us as we want programs that are designed to meet our needs and we want to integrate to avoid duplication of efforts. And then, perfect. So first off, what is data management? Data management is a strategic approach to collecting, storing, and utilizing data. So for our definitions, data management involves that collection, storage, and utilization of information, of data, of digital assets. It involves a series of processes that set clear rules that communicate, aka teach, data expectations, and that monitor behavior to facilitate quality assurance. Now, before we skip ahead, I want to be very clear on what monitoring behavior means. It's not to be confused with a watchdog type approach. It's quite literally monitoring the behavior of the data to spot trends in errors, to allow for course correction, or to also help you update your training content. It's also to help you find and report on missing information so you can have a more robust data set, and it's also to track initiative progress. An example of that is what I call data health, which is a metric to monitor the cleanliness of your data that we'll discuss a little bit more later. Go ahead and move over. Beautiful. But why? Why bother with data management, right? I mean, we're probably all thinking it. Data management has the power to transform our data and digital assets into valuable commodities for informed decision making and competitive advantage. Valuable commodities means analytic information, so we have the ability to analyze and view trends. It also helps us create evaluation criteria, such as evidence to pursue or not pursue within a certain market segment, as well as compatibility with future tech, including AI. As we all know, context and good information, aka clean data, is paramount to retrieve meaningful results with AI. So, data management is about what you can do with the data as much as the availability of data. And then think about it. The less time you spend poring over archives, the more time you have to be creative and strategic. Plus, the data is already yours, so why not use it? I'm going to take a guess at what some of y'all are thinking. This probably seems like a lot of work, and in ways it is. It does take effort to create, implement, and maintain your data. But I would also suggest that it's work to have to cross-reference resumes to find mutual staff team projects, which was always a very exhausting and stressful effort when I was on a deadline personally. It's also work to search data archives to find photo agreements so you know how and when you can use certain photographs in your proposals or social media or whatever other way your website you may wish to use your photos. And it's also work to replace burnt out team members. So, really, the work is unavoidable. It all takes work, but we can choose our work. And that leads me to some examples on the cost of data handling. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and then I'm going to share a personal story about data management that really led to an interesting success. First, the good. Amazon. And I think we all know who Amazon is, what Amazon is, I should say, although sometimes it feels like it's its own person. Amazon started in 1995 as an online bookstore, and that's it, just books in Jeff Bezos' garage. In 1999, they chose to introduce third party seller services. And with that introduction, Amazon also would leverage data and analytics. So it allowed them to use recommendation engines. So, you know, the things that say customers who bought this also bought XXXXX, or customers who bought this also bought, or also viewed, excuse me, customers that viewed this also viewed this widget. So that was all supported by data analytics, which Amazon's ability to collect, analyze, and capitalize on those data analytics has allowed it to grow into one of the world's most valuable companies today. So that's definitely an example of the good that can come from data. Maybe you're thinking, but what if I don't want a data? So the bad. Unfortunately, it's Kodak, and I'm a photographer, so this one's very near and dear to my heart. In 1975, a Kodak engineer invented the first digital camera prototype, which it's really interesting that it was invented by Kodak, right? Instead of investing in digital photography, Kodak's leadership stuck to their firm business model, assuming that customers would never abandon printed photos and fearing that using digital media would cannibalize their very successful film business. By the 1990s, the data was there and it clearly showed people were shifting towards digital cameras, and the advent of social media was increasing the popularity and demand for digital photo sharing. Unfortunately, Kodak did not respond to this data, and by 2012, they filed for bankruptcy, ultimately becoming a cautionary tale. Now, a personal story about how data management led to success, the real, as I like to call it, which all of these are real, but this one's very real to me. And this is related to the pandemic. In 2020, as we all know, the world literally shut down due to COVID, and workers were sent to remote work. There was also a major increase in the need for medical care facilities, and it was so much that it overwhelmed existing facilities. In response, many non healthcare facilities were repurposed as healthcare facilities, things like stadiums, or deactivated hospitals were reactivated. The urgency of the situation left very little time for anyone to act, which led to extremely tight proposal deadlines. Think like 24 hours from announcement to award. Having information available helped my then organization remain competitive. And that organization won many of those jobs, which ultimately allowed them to continue work and even grow through the pandemic. My friends, the data on data is here. So, not wanting to or not feeling enabled to pay attention doesn't really matter. With that, let's get started. So, start today. What does that mean for you? Start today, right now. It won't be perfect, and that's fine. Starting today is not meant to be perfect. It's meant to give you a place to work backward from. Starting today creates a delineation between data that needs to be fixed, what I also like to call historical data, and that can be even projects that were awarded yesterday. If it's not something that you're doing today, it's something that needs to be fixed, historical data, and data that is at least moving in the right direction. Now, we wanted to give you some actionable items that you can take away to help you start today, which leads me to some questions to help you get started. So, some things that you can ask yourself, and I'll read all of them out loud and then I'll elaborate on a little bit, or I'll elaborate a little bit on them. What do you have that you can use? What data do you need? Are there any logical points to collect this data? How do you want it to work? And then, of course, we always want to keep it simple and make it simpler. So, what do you have that you can use? What's your existing tech stack? Is it something? Is it nothing? Whatever it is, think about what you have, whether it's an online repository, a CRM, a DAM, any combination of the above or none of the above, even. Think about what your resources are today that you can use. What data do you need? And we're definitely going to elaborate on this quite a bit in the upcoming slides, but use what you know today to help you evaluate the importance to help you target legacy data. So, what are the things that make it so you can or can't function? Are you always stumbling over trying to find projects in a certain geographic location? Or is it difficult for you to find experience within a market segment? These are the fields that you definitely need, and this is where you start. Are there any logical points to collect this data? Well, think about what your flow of process already looks like. There may be some semblance of a project startup. At least someone has to tell someone that a project is coming, right? Even if it's the most minor project startup, there has to be some semblance of it. So there's some information that could be collected at that project startup. There's also information that could be collected at project closeout, which again may not be a formal process right now to your organization, but at some time or at some point a project is going to end. So this would be what you could use as closeout. There's also personnel information that could be collected at new hire. And then of course, boilerplate, which can be created and stored really at any time. But if you don't already have that, the best time to do that is now. Next question is, how do you want it to work? And some big questions for that. Do you want your systems to integrate with other systems? Is that important to you? How do you want searchability to work? Do you want templates? All of these very valid questions that'll help you evaluate what your processes are going to evolve into. Because you may not have templates today, it still is important to start today. And then, of course, keep it simple and then make it simpler. So, barriers to a task often become reasons not to do a task. If something is too difficult, it's something that will often get abandoned despite the best intentions. Now, we'll get into some of the fields that I have started with and fields that I have expanded for projects, personnel, and boilerplate. Unfortunately, we can't talk on all topics in the amount of time that we have today, but we are going to talk about those fields for projects, personnel, and boilerplate. Some of the fields that I have collected for projects include a project name, and this would be an actual project name, an external project name, which would take into account any type of nickname or confidentiality, especially if you're not able to release that project name. You want to make sure that you make note of that confidentiality. And then any nicknames, so things that people call the project. If there's some kind of silly thing that people frequently refer to that project as, you want to make sure that you have the nickname just to make it so your teams are able to find and identify that project when that nickname is used. You also want location data, and at least to start, you want city and state to facilitate project searches by region. You would then, or I would at least recommend, you expand to things like county to help you search on a broader scope than just city and state, and even address, which your photographer, whoever is taking your photos, will definitely appreciate having the address. You would also want to look at relevant companies. At a minimum, I would recommend at least considering, and keep in mind, you may not have all of this information to start, but having the intention to get this information and places to store this information is still important. So, relevant companies I would recommend starting with include owners, clients, if different than the owner, architects, engineers, general contractors, and any other teaming partners that might be important to your organization. So, mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, etc. I would also recommend dates. And to start, I would at least have a completion year. I know that actual dates like month, day, year, whatever. It can all be very difficult to collect. Often it's not included in information, and it takes a little bit of process, refinement, and development to get that information there. So I recommend starting with completion year, which will at least let you search for your projects by recency. That's very helpful for awards. You may expand that data later to include specific design dates, specific construction dates like a start and an end. So that would be groundbreaking. And then, of course, the end date for construction is helpful for photography and any other relevant event dates like maybe a ribbon cutting or substantial completion versus actual completion. You would also want to track market segments, and these are subjective to each organization, but make sure your projects have one and make sure that they're defined. We're going to talk about value lists and defining that list of values a little bit more later. For example, and when I, or at least when I say that these are subjective to each organization, for example, if you don't do healthcare projects, don't have a healthcare market segment. I also advise that you collect some size details and you start with square footage. You may expand to things like the amount of buildings on a campus or the total floors for both the building and or the project, site acreage, or other detailed project counts such as parking stalls, the number of beds, the number of keys, units, seats, cells. I mean, really, the sky's the limit when you get into those detailed project counts, but I would not advise that you start there. I'd advise that you evolve to there. I'd also suggest costing information, starting with some sort of a published cost, which is the amount that you can publicly state. And I would include confidentiality information in there because if you can't state a cost, you want to make sure that people know that you're not allowed to, that it's confidential. And you may expand later to include original budget, final budget, and associated fees. Next, we'll discuss personnel. And some of the project fields I've collected for personnel include a name, such as the HR name, their preferred name, like Matthew prefers Matt, Christopher prefers Chris, Brandy prefers Master O Brandy One, any nicknames as well. And a situation that arose at a previous organization is we had a gentleman that went by the name Cowboy. I couldn't even tell you what his real name was. No idea. Everybody called him Cowboy. But if we couldn't search for his name as Cowboy, then we would not be able to find him. I also recommend dates, including their start date, their time in the industry, so a date for when they started in the industry, and a separation date. And the separation date may not seem relevant, but it's very helpful for employees that leave an organization and then come back. I also recommend experience, so projects with previous companies as well as projects with the current company, and then licenses and certifications such as LEED, DBIA, OSHA, or state-specific individual licenses like PE, Architect, and GC. And then next we'll discuss boilerplate. And when it comes to boilerplate, I always encourage teams to think about what they are always answering. Some of these items that I've seen in my experience include a company overview or what is sometimes called an about us. And I would recommend having these for any company that is within your organization. So if you've got multiple companies under an umbrella organization, have a company overview for the umbrella organization, as well as for each of the individual companies that fall beneath that umbrella organization. I've also seen sustainability, quality, schedule, fee justification, which seems to be very prevalent with GCs, but still can come up on the AE side as well, excuse me. Disciplines, divisions or other special groups, write-ups on risk management, or documents in general, including things like insurance certificates, bonding letters, or licenses. And those licenses may be company or personnel licenses. Although there are many different options, I'm going to say too, for how you can manage your text. We have been working with the new OpenAsset text library for our boilerplate, and we have really been thrilled with it so far. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is when it comes to data management. It's helpful to think of your data in two parts, and we alluded to this slightly in previous slides, but we've got real-time data management, or what you can do starting today, and historical data management, which is anything that didn't happen today. Some of the strategies I recommend for real-time data management include project enrichment, project closeout, photo process, and new hire process. Now, of course, there are many other processes that you can involve in your real-time data management, but we can't discuss them all today. We'll discuss each of these in more detail on the next slides, though, and then we will discuss historical data management. First is project enrichment, also known as project startup. So what you do when you get a new project. For us, we run a filter in our CRM for recently created projects. Our integration with our accounting system will create new projects as they're created in the accounting system, and then these are pushed into our CRM. This sync from the accounting system includes some details, but not all details. We find that there's some details that are relevant to the company in terms of accounting, but marketing sometimes wants a little bit more. So we'll enrich the project on creation in the CRM, hence the name project enrichment as opposed to project startup. Some of the data that we'll enrich includes adjusting the project name to naming convention for consistency so that we don't have resumes that say maybe a university by the abbreviated name and then by the spelled out name and then by some other code name that it might go by. Adding confidentiality. So if there's confidentiality associated to a project, we very clearly indicate that in CRM. Adding a published project name, and that's associated to confidentiality as well. So if we're not able to release the name, we would say that it's confidential in that published project name. Adding any project nicknames, adding disciplines that are associated to the project, adding any detail categories, which are granular details that are associated to a market segment, and also adding the county. We do also, as a function of project enrichment, verify that information that is typically included in the sync is present, such as a city, a state, end dates. Those are really the hot buttons that we focus on, but we make sure that the information is all present. If you don't have a CRM, you could manage data via a hosted form or a shared online Excel file, and you could incorporate some of those steps like adding confidentiality or adding a county or adding really whatever is relevant to you as part of that startup. And this leads me to project closeout, which is what you do when a project ends. We use a workflow from CRM that triggers off of the project completion date. For an AE firm, this may be two dates, one for design and one for construction. We then email the team a generated template that can be generated from either our CRM or our DAM. We use the generated template to share information that we've collected so far about the project for verification. And this template also includes instructions for how to fill out the form so the project team knows what we're looking for in terms of information. The fields in our template mirror the fields in our CRM and our DAM, which helps others on the team know where to place data if they're doing any kind of data entry that's affiliated with the template. We also use quick parts, which are currently available on Outlook for PC, not Outlook for Mac, and we'll discuss quick parts a little bit more later on, but I love them. If you don't have CRM, maybe you have a DAM instead, you can use your DAM's reporting capabilities or a spreadsheet to catch up on project closeouts. If that's the approach you're taking, I would specifically recommend that you create some kind of a recurring calendar invite for when you want to review those closeouts. The cadence will depend on your firm. I've seen some firms that need to do this weekly and some that can work with monthly. With that calendar invite, make sure that you include instructions, any relevant quick parts, again, we'll discuss that later, and documentation as part of the invitation, which will allow you to send it to new people that may be working on that very easily. We'll talk more about calendar invites as well in some future slides. And then I recommend that you send these closeout requests from a shared email. So your team is trained to send to this shared email rather than an individual email, which helps future-proof the process. Next, we'll discuss some helpful tips for photo process, which is also what you do when a project needs photos. We start this well before the project ends. We identify key projects that we want photos for before we ever get close to ending. We sync these projects from our CRM to our DAM, creating a project shell that our team will use to upload photos upon completion when they're taken. We also trigger a workflow for photography based on project completion, which comes from our CRM. If you do not have a CRM or a DAM, you could set calendar invites for recurring photo completion reviews and use spreadsheets to track these projects and dates. If you use a non-DAM for image storage, meaning not a DAM, I would also advise some sort of naming convention for your folders and images. For example, you may say project number, underscore project name, underscore project location as a standard. If you include these standard items, especially the project location, it will give you the ability to search by location within your server files, which is nice. And also adhering to a naming convention now makes it easier for you to consider bulk image upload in the future should you choose to implement a DAM. Lastly, we'll discuss a new hire process, which is what you do when a new employee starts. Again, this is moving from today forward, so we're not necessarily discussing what happens with employees that already work for your organization. First off, I would recommend that you do yourself a favor and you double down on the folks that you will be generating resumes for. If it's not someone that you'll generate a resume for, it doesn't seem wise to spend the time fully populating resume details for the person. I would recommend, and this is what we do, you create a new hire questionnaire that includes instructions for the person filling it out. Have these fields match wherever you will be storing the information. This makes it so you can delegate the process to others and the fields are clearly labeled so they know what goes where. Um, and again, I mentioned it not to be confused with a resume review process. I'll discuss this a little bit more in our next slide on historical data. Some helpful processes, and just to kind of reiterate, we're talking historical data now and not our real-time data management. So this is how you're going to clean up the wealth of information that probably needs to be cleaned up within your organization. So some helpful processes for historical data management include data cleanup sessions, which are calendar sessions for data management. If you have data to clean, you need to clean it. So even an hour a week or a month helps. You also want to look into administrative reports, target data cleanup, resume review process, and progress tracking, which takes me to some helpful processes in terms of data cleanup sessions. So those data cleanup sessions, again, as a reminder, are those calendar sessions for data management. With that, cleaning data, you need that time to clean it. Create a calendar invitation. Include details for what needs to be updated and how, making sure you reference any relevant quick parts that you need to use, or you reference any relevant reports that you need to use. Maybe you attach relevant SOPs or documentation. And you want to create separate invitations for different things. For example, you want one invitation for project enrichment, one invitation for project closeout, one invitation for personnel review, one invitation for photos, etc. Whatever the processes are that you're going to be doing recurring data cleanup on, have an invitation for that. The reason I suggest that is if you've got multiple people working on these processes. For example, maybe you've got a counterpart that is helping you with the project enrichment, or you've got someone that's helping you with the closeout, or you've got someone that's going to work on the photos. You can send the relevant invitation to that person without giving a whole big list of things that need to be done, which helps eliminate the confusion and remove barriers to implementation. On this slide, I also recommend administrative reports, which you can see I've got linked to it is a fake calendar invitation, but I do have those linked. And so those would be links from our CRM that we use to help find missing information for cleanup. And that takes me to target data cleanup, or what I like to call starting where it matters the most. So you can start however you wish to. Sometimes most recent is helpful. Sometimes the higher end or preferred projects is most helpful. Sometimes there's a big focus on strategic market segments, the areas that you wish to grow first. In the past, I've used those criteria, the recency, the high end market segments. I've asked teams to identify top projects, so top tens, as I like to call it, within those segments, within the recent projects, or within what we consider to be high end, to enrich first. Making sure those projects are cleaned up first is going to make that data accessible to your team. And it ultimately helps increase buy in because you've got the information available for the projects that are always used. And that takes me to resume review. Resume review is what we do with our current employees. So anybody that hasn't started today 30 forward, you want to provide the details that you do have for these folks and ask them to verify that information and add any missing information. Similar to a new hire process, you want to double down on the folks that you will be generating resumes for. If it's not someone you will generate a resume for, don't spend the time fully populating their resume details. We run our templates out of CRM and out of OpenAsset. If you don't have a CRM, you could run templates out of OpenAsset or vice versa. And we like to run a template because it does pull the information that we already have about a person, so we can present it to them and show them that we have been retaining the information. Lastly, I'd like to discuss project or progress tracking, which helps show where you are. And you can use this to identify where you are and communicate this to your team. If your team doesn't know where your data is, it's very difficult for them to understand progress. I would recommend finding ways to track your current and historical data. So to do this, you figure out what variables are needed for what you would consider to be complete data, and then use some reporting function or Excel to calculate how many of the projects that are incomplete or missing one of those variables versus total projects in the system. Give it a ranking, whether that's a grade, a percentage, etc. I call this data health. So data health is projects that are missing any number of variables, and I establish which variables are most important over the total amount of projects that are in the system. And so we give it a ranking, that grade, percentage, etc. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about, I guess I should say, I'll talk about some of the things I've screwed up and some of the cool things that I've learned, which I would consider to be best practices. Please don't do the things I've screwed up as a best practice. Please avoid them. Learn from me. First thing is I did InDesign templates for template review. This created barriers because only marketing people had InDesign. We had to convert it, export it to a PDF. Most of our project team members did not have a proper PDF viewer. They used Bluebeam instead, which is really great until you want somebody to give you edits in it, right? It really created some weird layouts. It excluded information that was included in our system, that was included on the template. It just was really nightmarish, and it made for a very difficult process for the people that were reviewing the data as well as the people that were entering the data. Our solution is to use a Word template so anyone could open it as everyone had Word. It also was really nice because we could generate the template and then just drag it over to the email instead of needing to create the template, export it to a PDF, and then put it on the email. So it saved a step. We also did not initially track, or I should say, I also did not initially track data cleanliness metrics. People didn't know where we were with the data progress. And even though people may not always look at these metrics, it's good to have them when you need them. So the solution was instituting data health tracking on a monthly basis, as well as storage and retention of those previous records. We did not initially use quick parts, and as a note, these are not available on a Mac. I'm really sorry, y'all, that are Mac users. But we created our solution, I should say, is that we created quick part libraries, which help us future proof this if and when you get more people to assist you with the process. And even if you're a one-person show, it makes it so much faster to just be able to drop things into your email. Some of the cool things I have learned, mainly through trial and error, are sample data entry, scribe how, lists of values, how to manage your Outlook invites, and quick parts, which I'll discuss in more detail on the following slides. First off, sample data entry. So this shows people how you want data entered and the place that you want them to enter the data. And I have these sample projects in whatever system we are using. So there is a sample project in our CRM. There's a sample project in our DAM, so people can reference it regardless of the system they're in. And essentially, it is a sample of the correct format. I like to include instructions where I can. In some cases, you're not able to. In some cases, you can. And then I use the copy in my fields to kind of explain how certain fields should be filled out. So for example, for the project name, we'll just say our internal project name, which is what we would use to search. I'll call that project internal project name, which is the project you use to search. That's what I name my project as. So I use that copy in the fields to explain how certain fields should be filled out. Although we're only showing our CRM screenshot right here, we do again have sample projects in both our CRM and our DAM, which is OpenAsset. Next, we'll discuss Scribe How. And Scribe How is, I like to call it AI little help from my friends. It's an AI program, and there's a couple of them out there. I use Scribe How, but you can use whichever one you wish to use. It's an AI program that creates content on a process as you walk through the process. So it highlights click points, it adds links, it creates text based on your actions, and creates screenshots. It's really cool. And then ultimately, you can also convert that to a PDF, a step by step. It's a major time save if you create SOPs. Next, we'll discuss value lists, lists of values. So these are the terms that you're going to use within your organization, like market segments, maybe project details, construction types, services provided, status types or criteria. It can really be anything that you want people to use to quantify, or to categorize, excuse me, to categorize your data. And so for that, to keep everyone on the same page, you need to have it defined and you need to have it publicly available. We link ours to the home screens on both our CRM and our DAM. And you could do this via an external spreadsheet, or even if you're an OpenAsset user, you could also use it within their text library feature as well. Next, we'll discuss Outlook invitations. And for Outlook invitations, we've touched on some of this previously. You want to make sure that there is an individual invitation for each process that you're looking to have. So you can forward the relevant tasks to relevant people and avoid the clutter of confusing requests. Again, big barrier. You want to have it scheduled on a recurring cadence, which is going to be different for each organization. You want to have the instructions included, so associated reports linked, relevant content such as scribe how documentation included, or any other types of step-by-step instructions. And having those step-by-step instructions serve as a reminder to the person completing the process, whoever is opening that calendar invite, which helps ensure process consistency. And lastly, we'll discuss quick parts, which is a function of Microsoft Outlook. Again, I'm really sorry for my Mac friends out there, but it lets you organize and drop in frequently used body copy for emails. What I would advise you do, and you could do this too, even if you're a Mac user, you just may need to do it by spreadsheet and you will not have that drop-in functionality, but you can at least copy and paste from a library. But I'd recommend that you create a library of quick parts. For example, the quick parts that you send if you're giving a resume review request or a new hire information request, a project information request, whether that's closeout, enrichment, or some type of midpoint check-in. I also will use quick parts for system access emails at onboarding. So welcome, this is how you're going to access our system. Here are some key points to know. So that's what I recommend for a library. And of course, the sky's the limit on those as well. Guys, that's all I got. And I'm really glad we got through that. Let me turn the time back over to Dhoreena and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandy. That was a lot of information, and we already have a lot of questions coming in. Some key takeaways here for the team. Thank you all again for being here. Data management, as you saw and heard from Brandy, requires a lot of effort, but so does having to search for it over and over again. So again, it's all about starting today and making sure that that is well structured for the teams to be able to make it more accessible. The other thing is balancing immediate access with the long-term organization. So Brandy went through both real-time and historical data management. So balancing what is happening now with what can we clean up with the data that currently exists. And third is learning not only from your successes, but also the failures in data management. It's identifying what works, iterating on it, and continuous improvements along the way. So if you can walk away with any secret formula today, it is this. It's if you have less time or you take less time looking for data, that equals more time for you to have more strategy or be more strategic and creative that us marketers love, which equals to more pursuit wins. Similar to the creative proposal that Brandy talked about from the very beginning about groceries and having to go to different aisles for me to learn about what they're proposing. So with that, let's get into Q&A, shall we, Brandy? All right.
Sounds great.
First question is, okay, this is around change management. How do you encourage others to adopt these systems as a first step and then ensure they're consistently using them as part of their day-to-day workflows?
So I think some of that's going to vary depending on whether you're implementing an existing application or I should say implementation of the system, or if you're doing it brand new. If you're doing it brand new, then you have the ability to kind of control what the content is that you're going to present to people. And I would say make sure that you've got a robust onboarding process. So you tell people how they're going to access the system. You make sure they know how to use it. You make sure that there's some instruction on how to use it. And it doesn't mean that you have to have documentation today, but you do want to have some kind of a recurring training protocol to help people out with that. In situations where maybe you are working with an existing implementation, you still have people that are already using the system, but you may encounter some people that have used the system didn't have a great experience with it, and so they've chosen to abandon the system. So that part it creates an entirely different challenge. Likewise, to implementing a new system, though, I would recommend having a robust onboarding process. So, kind of like the real-time data management versus historical data management, the people that start today 30 forward are going to have an entirely different experience with that system. Part of that, too, is also in cleaning up those target projects or the key personnel. If you start with what's used most people are going to see value in the system much faster. So you want to try and encourage people to see value in the system, and then you want to have those training protocols, and I would recommend getting some sort of a documentation to help you with your adoption as well.
Awesome. Someone asked, speaking of onboarding, did you onboard OpenAsset or Uninet first? Do you have a recommendation?
Oh, that is a great question. So I've actually onboarded it a few times. In one of my situations, I onboarded Uninet first, then I onboarded OpenAsset. In my most recent integration, I actually onboarded an existing instance of Uninet and also did OpenAsset at the same time. And I found one, having some experience in what that onboarding process looked like, I was able to control what the integration was. So I was able to limit fields that maybe needed to be cleaned up because I was working on an instance of Cosential that needed some cleanup. I didn't want to integrate all of the fields over immediately. So I was very strategic about what I would push over. And in fact, when I initially implemented OpenAsset, again, side by side with this major cleanup and re-implementation of Uninet, when I did that, I only integrated the project name and the project number for me to be able to create a project shell from the CRM so that people could upload photos. And so that was what I did. And having the photos accessible, even though the search capabilities were somewhat limited because I was not bringing over any key project details because those needed to be cleaned up in the CRM, but having those images available, having the drag and drop capacity available was it was a massive improvement for our team because we didn't have the broken links anymore. So it was really great. Um, so in one case, it was Uninet first, then it was OpenAsset, and then in the most recent case that I've worked with, it was Uninet and Asset or OpenAsset at the same time. And I would say really, I mean, you could say either way was pretty fine, but my preferred method was doing both at the same time because I liked having both available to my team at the same time instead of having great data, but a really inhibited photo process. So now we can work on having a really robust photo process at the same time as having really great data.
That's great to hear. Another question is, would you recommend that data management be performed by a separate, dedicated team from the bids and proposal folks? If we don't have
Mhm.
the same tools you use, what's your best practices to streamline data management?
So to answer that question, I do think that you will often see the most reward if you have a dedicated person that's doing that. I also understand that sometimes that's not a negotiation for whatever the reason may be. Maybe some people don't see the value in that position, but I do think that you are ultimately going to see a lot more benefit if you have a dedicated person. If you don't have a dedicated person, it's going to take some resource from your proposal team to at least figure out what kind of processes you can have, and then you share the load amongst the proposal team. And realistically, your proposal team is often already an overstretched resource because of the deadline-driven nature of that job. So it's very difficult to get consistency, and it's difficult to get it where people even have the time to make any changes within the system. So overall, my best recommendation is having a dedicated person that can take care of it. And the other big bonus to that too is having a dedicated person that can take care of it is it's someone that has likely already done this before or has some experience. They'll be able to help out with system integrations. They'll be able to do certain things that maybe a proposal person would not be able to do. Likewise, a proposal can do magic that a data person may not be able to do. So it's really just a great partnership. But ultimately, yes, I do recommend having a dedicated person.
That's a great segue to another question that we got is, should everyone be responsible for keeping data clean? Or do you have a group of auditors?
So I would say yes and no. I think everyone's responsible for keeping data clean and that everybody has a role. So even within the team that I currently work on, if somebody gets an update from a proposal, from a pursuit, they would send that to me so that I can update it within the system. So even though they're not necessarily directly updating the information, their role is to make sure that that updated information gets communicated to me so that I can make those updates. Depending on the bandwidth of your team, you can have multiple people doing these updates. I've worked in various different, um, how do I want to say it, arrangements where I've had a data team in the past. I've been a solo person in the past. I've had a combination of data teams or key personnel that I can reach out to. So all kinds of different structures. But ultimately, yes, everyone is responsible. You just have to be very clear on what those responsibilities are. For example, the proposal team is likely going to get updates to information, but if they hold on to that and never communicate it to you, that information is as good as dead because it's never going to get updated. I don't have the time to reach out to every person, and I'm not a mind reader, so I can't say, well, I think there was something that was wrong on that pursuit. So the proposal team's role would be to forward it to whoever would be doing the data updates. If you have a data team, you could have different individuals that help with QA, but QA is actually a function that I schedule for. So I have recurring calendar invites that are specifically dedicated to QA to make sure that updates have been done correctly. And then if I'm onboarding someone that's going to be doing major updates to data, I also have some workflows that show me key things that have been updated so I can go back and check on it to make sure that it's correct, especially during that onboarding process. So I'm really watching what's being done in that in those beginning phases to make sure it's correct. And if it's not correct, then I can retrain and I can adjust my training materials appropriately. I also don't like to onboard someone to do updates until I have training materials. And I know that's really a tricky one because you're like, well, I don't have time to do this. I'm onboarding someone because I don't have time. That's why I've suggested Scribe How, which was a really big game changer for me in creating documentation. And then I would also advise when you're onboarding someone, you start with working sessions. So you maybe take an hour a week, an hour every other week, whatever cadence works with your schedule, and you update the data together because that way, when you encounter some of those wonky data situations, like maybe you've got a project that's really a sub-project of another project, or there's a project that came in or needs to be entered, but there isn't really information for it. Whatever the wonky situation is, the person that you're onboarding can see how you can handle or how you handle that because you can do your best with training, but I don't think it's realistic to account for everything that you can encounter in training. You can definitely make your best effort, but it's really hard to think of everything. So those working sessions are immensely beneficial too.
Amazing, Brandy. We're at 2 minutes. There are still other questions, but we will definitely get to you through email to make sure that gets back to you. So Shannon and Daniel, I see your questions. We're going to get back to you. We wanted to close this out. Brandy and I will actually be at SMPS SWRC in Utah. So if you're going to be there, please say hello to Brandy and I. We're going to be at the OpenAsset booth. She's going to be hanging out with the team. So we're excited to answer any questions, say hello. And besides SWRC, we're also going to be at NERC in April, as well as Uninet Champions, where Brandy will be speaking more about templates there. And we're also going to be at CERC in May. So if you're going to be at the events, please make sure to stop by our booth and say hello. And with that, I want to say thank you all for being here. And Brandy, thank you for your tremendous expertise and helping everyone else here. I've seen in the chat that it's been impactful and it's so helpful, and they're already asking for the recording. So we really appreciate you sharing the time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all and have a lovely day. Bye.